Hello, and welcome to Truly Terrifying. This channel aims to bring you the best true horror stories from all over the world. If you enjoyed this video, then please subscribe and click the notification icon to find out whenever we upload new videos. Thank you. In this video, we look at 10 true creeper stories. A walk down the street. This happened back on Christmas of 2019, which means that it got dark outside pretty early. I've always enjoyed the dark, and you can say that I'm quite the horror fan, so I usually don't get scared that easily. Back then, I was doing robotics after school activity with two of my friends. I don't anymore since the whole quarantine thing happened. I always took the school bus to go home, but it's forced to leave me a little further away from my home because the bus driver needs to go a different way to leave the others, which means that I have to walk 3 streets to get home. Now, as I've said, I enjoy the dark, but in that one particular place, it made me feel uncomfortable. That place being the first road I had to walk. It had only a few lights and it was pretty long. But the thing that really made me feel uncomfortable was the fact that you would barely see other people. So basically, every time I had to walk down the street, I was kind of alone except for a few times. The day this incident happened, I was about to start walking towards the buses because we were just finished with our lesson. On my way, I was talking to a friend whose name doesn't matter. We were basically talking about what we were going to do in the afternoon. Out of nowhere, I decided to tell him about the street. He seemed to make fun of the fact that it gave me the chills. I laughed too, just because I didn't want to start any argument. At least, that's what I remember thinking. It was about 5:10 when the bus started to leave the school. It usually is a 1.5 hour ride because of the many kids in it, but I had no problems with that. I just sat and did my own thing. I listened to music, drew on my sketchbook, and had a little chat with some of the people in the bus to kill some time. It was 6:30 when I finally arrived to my stop, and as usual, I had plenty of walking to do. The area was pretty lighted as always, but when I started walking down the street, it felt like suddenly the power went down or something. As I walked deeper in, I started to lose the light of the area I started from. Now, I know that some of you are probably going to be thinking that if this road bothered me so much, why didn't I tell my parents so they can change the stop or something? I was just shy to tell anyone, in fear that they would make fun of me. I mean, doesn't it sound hilarious? Well, what I experienced didn't make it hilarious at all. As I was walking down, I thought that I saw this old lady coming my way from the distance. I didn't think much about it. When we were too close and about to pass each other, I could see her face even better. I'm pretty sure she was on her early 70s for sure. She gave me this grumpy, mad look. Now, I'm used to being polite to other people, no matter how bad they might be, so by the time I passed her, I told her good evening. She didn't respond, but she kept staring at me with this mad look. After she passed me, though, she mumbled these words that meant beware in Greek. I was a bit disturbed by that, but I tried to ignore it since it could mean anything. I kept walking down the street. As I was walking, I passed this house. It was sort of an old house that was on the right side of a small road for your car to get in. But that wasn't just it. In that little road, I saw the outline of a tall person, just standing there. I was 100% sure that by the moment I passed, he kept his eyes on me. But he did nothing. He just stayed there. After almost being at the end of the street, I felt like I froze when I heard the sound of footsteps behind me. I tried to have a peek, and there he was. That same outline was right behind me. Not moving, but I could understand that he was looking at me. I kept walking, pretending that I wasn't suspicious. One part of me said that this man was dangerous, but the other part said that he was just walking down the street too. The first part got the best of me. I kept walking while hearing footsteps behind. When I got to the end of the street, I stopped and sighed as he couldn't see me anymore. I started now to walk faster down the other street. This one had cars, which was a huge relief. When I was finally at the outside of my house, I pressed the doorbell. Usually my parents took a while to ring the doorbell, so I stayed there and waited. But then, out of the few sounds I could hear down the street, I felt like I could hear the sound of someone running. I didn't think much of it at first, but I started to feel worried. while the footsteps came closer and louder. I stood by the door and then I saw him. The man that I saw on the street, the dark outline was on my home street, stripping it down as if he was trying to find someone. I felt my heart drop as I saw a glimpse of him running by. Thankfully, he didn't recognise me because of how fast he was going. By the moment he left, I started pressing the doorbell constantly in a panic, and finally the door opened. I sprinted inside and told everything to my parents. They told me that it was probably just a random man. I haven't told this story to anyone besides my parents since. I've never seen that man again, thankfully, and the last 2 times I had an after-school class, my father came to take me with his car. It's been 5 months since the incident, but I don't think I'll ever forget that man sprinting by my house, looking for me. Creepy guy on Grindr. It's not the scariest story, but it happened to me when I was 25 years old and I started in gay dating. I still had little experience. This guy was in his early 40s, so 15-20 years older than me, but he looked attractive in his pictures. We were supposed to meet at an airport. I was coming back from a trip and he was around at that time, so I told him my arrival time and where I came from. First mistake. Even if the airport is a public place, it is a bad idea to plan an appointment in an inevitable place. I mean, that whatever happens, I had to be at the airport at the time I told him. It's not like I made an appointment at a bar, you know. It just took a simple search for this guy to find out exactly when I was going to arrive at the airport. But I was naive and our discussions were completely normal. First red flag. He asked for my identity, first and last name. I refused politely to tell him, saying that it was just a little too early and that he just needed my first name. Second red flag. He sent me more and more messages. He got impatient when I did not answer quickly enough. He gave me nicknames as if we were already in a relationship, although we had not even yet met. Even worse, he seemed to be on some sort of incestuous father and son trip. Third, and huge red flag. About 2 to 3 days before my arrival at the airport, and therefore our appointment, he tried to call me. I did not answer, but he left me a really disturbing message. Assume my name is John Smith. My voice autoresponder was, "Hello, it's John Smith. I'm not available at the moment. I'll call you back as soon as possible." It was my second mistake, giving my number to strangers on Grindr while leaving personal information on my answering machine. His voice message was, "Hey, John Smith. I'm delighted to know you, blah blah," in a triumphant tone, like I owned you or something. It was too much. He was starting to freak me out, and I told him that I didn't want to meet him anymore. But he turned a deaf ear. He continued to talk to me and to pretend that our date was still maintained, while I continued to ignore it. At that time, 2012, we could not block SMS, only calls, so he could harass me in writing. I really thought he was crazy when he told me the day of my flight I would be dressed in a black coat, blah, what about you? At that moment I lost my temper and I just said to him, "Shut up and leave me alone." I was really stressed when I arrived at the airport. I was afraid of meeting him even if I knew that I was not risking anything theoretically. I was paranoid to the point where I was watching behind me when I was waiting to take a taxi. I was afraid that he would be mad to the point of following my taxi by car. Later that evening he left me a message. "What happened, John? I waited for you. I worried, and I called the police." Seriously. I think he never went to the airport. He just wanted to take revenge for my rejection. But in any case, this guy was super shady. I'm glad I never met him. Needless to say, I fixed my fucking voice autoresponder. Walmart stalker. I was around 18-19, still living at home with my mum and my little sister, and we would take weekly trips to Walmart when mum and I got paid. I told my mum and sister I was going somewhere, and that just meant I was going to walk around. While I was walking to the back of the store, I realised that a man was walking behind me. He was about 10 feet away, and I thought nothing of it. It seemed pretty normal, but something was off, and I couldn't shake the feeling. But I also kept telling myself that I was being crazy. I kept walking, looking back every few seconds to see if the guy was still there. And he was. I also noticed that weirdly enough, there was nobody around this area of the store, and that freaked me out even more. I picked up the pace to the point where I was almost running, and the guy was chasing me at this point. I was on the verge of tears, wondering why there was nobody around, until I got to the electric section and I finally saw some people. I didn't say anything to anybody, though, because I guess since we got to a point where people were around, he left. I was freaked out, but relieved. I found my mum around the frozen food section and told her that the strange old white guy was following me. That freaked her out, and she told me not to go anywhere. My little sister, the angel that she is, was trying to comfort me, and I felt somebody watching me across from where we were. I saw a head poking out of the women's clothes section, and I whispered to my sister that that was the guy who was chasing me. She turned and saw him, and that's when he started walking away. And again, I thought that he would be gone since my little sister saw him. We continued shopping, and while we were in line for the cash register, I noticed him again, and I told Mom that that was the guy. She told me not to look back at him and just ignore him. He couldn't do anything since there were tons of people around. We quickly got checked out and left as soon as we could. I kept looking back to see if he was chasing us as we left to the car, but he wasn't. We quickly put our bags in the car and dipped. Mum was scared and angry and told me not to separate from her again. And to the creepy stalking old dude at Walmart, let's not meet. Ever. The elevator ride. I keep remembering crazy and creepy stories that happened to me when I was younger, and most of the ones I can think of are neighbours related. I have been living in the same apartment complex almost all my life, so I recognise most of the faces that I encounter in my area, because as much as they saw me grow up, I also saw them grow old too. I have a neighbour that lives just across from the apartment that I live in. They are twin buildings. And I don't know much about him. I just know that he has a wife and a son. I recognise him because he has some recognisable features to me since I saw him for years. He is very tall and has white hair. Honestly, I never did think anything of him because we never had reason to talk to each other, especially when I was young, even though I feel and felt pretty safe around my area all my life, so even if we did talk, it wouldn't have bothered me. For what follows, I think I need to add that some neighbours of mine have connections to each other. Some have family members in the same apartment complex. Some are friends, etc. But since most of us have been there for a good part of our lives, we know who's related to who and who's friends with who. But not in an intrusive way. Let's not get creepy here. I don't know how old I was exactly, but I do remember that it was about the time that I started hitting puberty. So I was still young, but not a child anymore. I walked into the elevator, and there I saw him inside it. I don't think he followed me or anything, but he was just there. So we said hi to each other, and then I proceeded on pushing the button for my floor. I don't remember him pressing any button, so I didn't know which floor he was aiming to go to. So the ride was silent in the beginning, and then out of the blue he said, "You really became beautiful." I was a little taken aback because I was not prepared for him to say something like that. Usually I don't talk too much in elevators, and I literally don't know the guy. And I remember as clear as day responding to him, "No, I just grew older." Then I arrived at my floor and entered into my apartment. Now, years after, there were a lot of dots I couldn't connect. First of all, the fact that he was in the elevator and didn't push any button, as if he was waiting for someone or something. It was weird. I was the only one pushing the button for my floor, so was he expecting me or someone else? If you're going to see someone, you would push the button and go hold the door for them. He did none of that. Second of all, to this day, I still don't know what he was doing in my building. He lives on the one across from mine. I recently asked my sister, she refers to him as the creepy guy, to ask her if she knows if he has any relationship or connections with people that are living in our building, and to her knowledge, he doesn't. And last, but not least, why would you even say that to a young girl? It feels like he was waiting for me to just grow up a little bit older, for it to be safe or less creepy to be saying something like that to me, and I'm so happy that I was having none of it that day and responded back to him so that he will understand that this is just a bizarre thing to say to a young girl. Because it wasn't the first time he saw me, and he knew what he was doing. I also remember that after, when I was home, I just thought it was silly of him to say that because I was just naively thinking that the only thing that had changed about me was that I was wearing mascara. Now that I'm older, I understand the situation and know that it was not the only thing that had changed about me. Of course, this was the time when my body started to mature. So here you go. I don't know what were his intentions. I don't know what he was doing here, if he was lurking for quite some time. I feel like every time I was around him, he would look at me or stare. Every time I see him, I still feel a little weird and keep thinking about that day. But now he always makes himself discreet. He bows his head and just sticks to the basic neighbour's greetings. Also, he still does live here and so do I. So I'd like to say, let's not meet again. But I will still meet him from time to time, whether I like it or not. My Bumble date from hell. So this, by far, is the craziest, scariest first date I ever had in my life. The date itself lasted about 2 hours, so keep that in mind when you are reading about the tornado of events that unfolded. So, to start from the beginning, I, 30 female, met this guy on Bumble, 39 male, while I was renting a room at a sober house in Colorado Springs to get everything squared away to officially move out here, nursing license transferred, job, apartment. After I officially moved out and got settled in, we talked on the phone a few times and decided to meet in person. It was about 4 in the afternoon and we planned to have dinner and maybe go on a scenic drive. He had asked me to pick him up from his work and we could go from there. Didn't think much of that at the time, so I went to his work and picked him up, figuring I would drop him back off so he could take his car and go home. First thing he told me to do when he got in my car is stop at the liquor store. He wanted to grab something for later. After he told me to stop at the liquor store, I felt kind of awkward because he knew that I was in recovery. At this point in my recovery, I feel okay with being around alcohol. He came out of the liquor store with 2 shooters of Patron and a bottle of vodka. Not even minutes after leaving the liquor store and me heading to the place where we were going to get food, he is slamming the shots of Patron in my car. I started noticing with his behaviour that he was very manic and kind of jumping from subject to subject, and then would randomly ask me if I was upset if he'd done something to make me mad. I already have all bad vibes and can tell something is very off with him. During our drive to get the food, he is telling me how when he was little he threw a rock purposely at a bunny and killed it, and also within the last 5 years was at a bonfire with his friends and shot a cat that was in the field. At this point, I'm totally weirded out and already trying to figure out how I'm going to end the date. This was brought up very casually, like it was no big deal. Also, he knows I have 3 cats. We get to the taco place and he proceeds to ask if they have no carb tacos. The lady looks confused and basically was like, tacos are pretty much all carbs. He started getting anxious about what to order. I could tell with his mannerisms. I ended up just ordering for us. He proceeded to then get a beer to go, along with a shot of Patron. Got it to go because of the whole COVID situation. So now we get into my car, and now I have a bottle of vodka, 2 empty shot bottles of Patron, which he just tossed in the side of the door, as well as the to-go beer and another shot of Patron. He continues to drink and would randomly shout, "Woo, look at us, we're in Colorado eating great tacos. I'm drinking, you're driving, it's beautiful out here." So I couldn't bear the date any longer and said I had to go meet a friend. He seemed a little upset and confused. So we get back to his dealership he works at, and he said it was fine to just drop him off. He wanted to go in the dealership he owns while people were still working and eat the tacos. He said, "Let's go in. It's a beautiful place. I can drink comfortably, we can eat the tacos." I declined and we ate them in the car, quick. When the plan was for us to go separate ways, he then asked if I can just bring him home. I said, okay, anything to get him out of my presence at this point. He also lives close by my apartment. Before we head to his place, he said he has to grab some stuff out of his car. So he gets back in my car and I hear him put something in the side of the door. I look over and see the handle of a gun. My stomach immediately dropped. I was like, is that a fucking gun? He laughed and said, yeah, I can't just leave it in my car. I love guns. I told him I was super uncomfortable and he just laughed like, why would you be uncomfortable? Basically just said, because I don't know you at all barely. This is our first time meeting and now you have a gun in my car? Thinking back, I should have told him to get out of my car, but I had never been in this kind of situation before. And the fact that there was now a loaded gun in my car and he was drunk, I did not know what to do, so just proceeded to leave the dealership and bring him home. So on the way to his apartment, he then asked me if he can see my phone. Thinking in my head like, okay, no way. You're drunk, you have a gun in my car, and now you want my phone in your possession. I asked why, and he kind of stuttered and said he wanted to look up a song. I said I would type it in, and he insisted that he type it. I then blurted out, no, you have a gun in my car, and now you want my cell phone. Not happening. He kept seeming so alarmed that I was so freaked out about him having the gun in my car, and that he wanted my phone. After typing in the song he wanted, I continued to humour him and make future plans and talk about how great of a time I had. This was the only tactic I could think of to keep him in a positive mood and think things were going great. All I could think was the loaded gun next to him. So finally, after what felt like hours, we get to his apartment. As he's getting out of my car, he goes to grab his gun very haphazardly and literally has his finger on the trigger. At this point, he was still in the passenger seat of my car. He then steps out and could probably see the look of fear in my eyes and laughed, and then whipped the gun around the front of him and finally put it back in his back pocket. Mind you, once again, he's been drinking this entire time and also told me he had shot and killed a cat on purpose. He then told me to keep the bottle of vodka he had bought, so I had to come back later to watch a movie with him. I said absolutely not. Take the bottle and I will call you after I meet my friend. I never reached out and I haven't heard from him again. Thank God. My stalker neighbour. Childhood story. Hit me baby one more time. Hi everyone. This is my first time posting on this thread after ages of lurking. I have tons of stories to post of creepy and strange encounters which I'm sure over time I will post on here, but I think I will start with the earliest one. It's going to be a long one, so sit tight. When I was about 6 years old, my mum officially ended her on and off relationship with my dad, and we moved into a small but cosy one-room apartment. I had my own room while my mum would sleep on a bed couch as she preferred to fall asleep with the TV. We were on the 3rd floor and the first door on that floor, so we only had one neighbour. When we first moved in, I was in school and my mum was unpacking at home. After she dropped me off, she met our neighbour next door. She introduced herself as his new neighbour, but he looked very resentful for some reason, as if my mum did something bad. After the introduction, he asked, "So you're the new neighbour?" Which was weird because my mum had just introduced herself. Regardless of the weird question, she said yes, and that she lived here now with her daughter, me. My girlfriend was supposed to move in here, but then she couldn't because you got the place first, he said to my mum grumpy. My mum was confused, but apologised for his inconvenience, and that was the first weird encounter with our neighbour. After we had lived here for some months already, he suddenly became very friendly. Before, we would only meet him on the floor sometimes, but he rarely left his house anyways, so we basically never saw or interacted with him. Then suddenly one day, my mum was coming home from work with me after picking me up from school, and he was standing at his door drinking coffee. "Hello, Mary." We say that's my mum's name. "I've made coffee. Do you want to have some coffee with me inside?" My mum politely declined, and in my memory she looked a bit frightened. He was a very tall man as well, and I think the sudden change in behaviour since the last conversation must have creeped her out a little. We went inside and I asked what that was all about. She told me that she believed that he might have a mental illness, and I agreed that this could be plausible. So we left it at that. Some days went by and nothing happened with the neighbour. We wouldn't actually see him at all in the days he wasn't communicating with us. Some night later, I woke up from someone playing Hit Me Baby One More Time by Britney Spears very loudly. Because I was around 6 or 7 at the time, I was thinking it must be the 4 a.m-ish music videos on the TV on some channel from my mum's living room. I just left it as that since my mum did not seem to hear it or complain and fell back to sleep. The next day I asked my mum about the music and she said she had turned off the TV after she dozed off, so it wasn't her. And she told me that she didn't hear nothing, so I just blamed it on me imagining it. Some days later at night, I would wake up from the music again around the same time. This time I was sure I was awake and I heard it. I went into the living room to wake my mum and noticed that you couldn't hear it from the living room. I woke my mum and showed her the noise and she clearly heard it too. She wandered around my room to see what direction it was coming from till she put an ear against the right wall of my room. After listening for a minute, she confirmed to me that it was coming from that side, that it was the neighbour. We didn't have other neighbours. I didn't think of that. I guess because I was a child. She called the police and complained to them about the music and that it woke me up, and she had a child that had to go to school the next day and is losing sleep due to this. My mum was never a woman to bullshit around. The police arrived 30 minutes later and we stood in front of our closed house door to listen to the conversation between our neighbour and the police. They told him a neighbour had complained and that he needed to turn down the music as it was already way past midnight. He was very blunt and avoided any further talk with the police, just saying, "Okay," all the time. After we heard the police leave and his door close, we went to bed. Immediately the next day, he was standing in front of his door as my mum was coming home alone. I was at my dad's place. My mum later told me the story. She was coming home from work. He asked her something along the lines of, "Did you call the police on me?" My mum, a single mother living next to a tall man who gave weird vibes, lied and denied the allegations. He asked her if she liked the music, and my mother told me it left her speechless. She said she didn't like Britney Spears. My mum was always more into Bon Jovi. She left quickly into the apartment. As it was a Friday, they had that encounter. She would stay in most of the weekend, being safe from the weirdo. But I wasn't here, so I don't know what small creepy things she might have noticed on the weekend. On Sunday, I came back from my dad's in the later evening. After dinner, I went to bed as I had school the next day. Again, I woke up in the night because of the same goddamn Britney Spears Best Hits album. This time it was Toxic. It was the early 2000s after all, 2005 I believe. I woke up my mum again and she came into my room, banging against the wall, revealing in that moment by doing that it was her that had called the police the other day. We heard the music being turned down lower but not turned off, and the neighbour screaming through the wall, "Do you like that song, Mary?" and then turning the music back up. My mum, understandably creeped out, called the police again, but before they could arrive he turned the music off and the police couldn't do anything as he turned off the music about 20 minutes already before they arrived. I guess he heard my mum say to me that she was calling the police again. I didn't sleep well that night and my mum didn't sleep at all. A few things happened since then that were rather unsettling. For example, we sometimes could hear him literally listening to our conversations. My mum's phone calls of when my mum had guests over, we could hear him moving rooms to the same direction as we did and him walking against the wall and then stop walking, indicating he was listening. Really creepy stuff, but my mum had no solid proof to call the police against him. One day we would walk our dog, a female golden retriever, and he would watch us from his window. When my mum noticed that the first time, she looked out for it the next time, and he was watching us from the window again. At this point, if not earlier, my mum had told my uncle about the neighbour, who would then show up once to knock on his door with the intention to tell him to leave us alone, but he didn't open the door to him. But he was very clearly home. We could hear him move inside. My uncle screamed it through his door, and we hoped that would have scared him off a little bit, but it certainly didn't. At this point, my mum didn't leave me alone anymore, not even in the apartment. I had to come with her wherever she went. Once we were walking the dog again, and he happened to come downstairs at the same time, he would stop to say, "Oh, she's a cute dog," But how did he know she's female? My mum got so frightened she didn't even reply, but acted as if we had forgotten something in the apartment, and we went back inside, as we didn't want to be outside when he knowingly was as well. It was clear he was listening to everything we said, through the walls, to the point where he even knew that our dog was female. Some time went by, and we would just notice his usual creepy behaviour of watching us from the window, listening through the walls, and the occasional Britney Spears music at night. Suddenly we were coming back from the grocery shopping, and there happens to be a piece of paper taped on his door. We looked at it, and it was a phone number. Without saying anything to me, my mum just looked at me briefly and took the paper, and we went inside our home. We looked at the paper and noticed he wrote it at the back of a recent grocery store receipt, where he apparently bought tons of cheese and bread, which is already weird. She told me she is going to call the number anonymously, and I should record it with my emergency cell phone. She started calling the number anonymously. I started recording, and the neighbour picked up. Looking back, I guess he saw us taking the note through his peek hole. He furiously started shouting into the phone, "Mary, it's 16:56, you should have called." He kept only saying this on the phone. We could even kind of hear it through the wall. He repeated this, then laid down the phone, walked around his room as we could hear, because his voice became more distant, but he kept saying the same thing. My mum called for 1 minute and then hung up. We were freaked out. I remember I was very scared and begged my mum to stay somewhere else tonight, but my mum told me no, this ends today, and it did. Hours later in the evening, something crazy happened. We didn't do nothing. All my mum did was call my dad to let him know what was going on, and he was on high alert to come over any time. We suddenly heard a knock on the door, not a neighbourly knock. It was like a police knock. My mum jumped up, obviously, cautiously walking to the door, looking through the peek hole, and it was the neighbour. Before my mum could react, he knocked again and said, "Mary, what's wrong? You haven't walked the dog. Open the door." My mum answered through the door, "Please go away." But he didn't. He kept talking through and knocking on the door. I got scared and asked my mum to call the police or my dad. The neighbour suddenly said, "Don't worry, V, my name, don't be scared." I got 100% more scared, and so did my mum. She started to scream through the door, "Fuck off, leave us alone." But he wouldn't leave us alone. My mum, I don't know why, opened the door and told him loudly to leave us alone, very seriously. I don't know what he said back really, but I don't believe it made much sense. As my mum was about to close the door on him, he suddenly put his foot in between and tried to force his way in. My mum pushed the door against his body and screamed for help while he tried to get into the apartment. I freaked out and started crying. I grabbed the fishing net I had and hit the neighbour with the handle of the net. After what seemed like only 2 minutes, a neighbour from upstairs ran down to our rescue, pulling the guy away from our door and holding him against the wall. My mum told me to go into the living room, but I stayed close so I could see our upstairs neighbour was shouting at our creepy neighbour to leave us alone, that we were a woman and a kid living here and that he's a danger to us. The creep then quickly disappeared into his apartment, and the good neighbour came to check up on us, telling us that the guy has always had a weird vibe and that he is in fact mentally ill, and this apartment was given to him by the government support. We thanked him for his help, and he informed us that he had called the police before and they would be coming shortly, and he was waiting for the police to serve as a witness. My mum called my dad for additional support, who almost arrived with the police at the same time. The police then knocked on his door, and after he asked who it was, the police told him somebody had called them on him due to him harassing his neighbours. He opened and demanded to see their badges, which they showed. My mum and I could look inside his apartment and it looked empty. He didn't have much furniture and it seemed like he just moved in there, with essential things missing like a fridge. The walls were dirty. He then said he didn't do anything, but the good neighbour told the police what happened. The creep then got asked for his ID. He said he didn't have any. The police didn't believe him and said that if he can't provide ID, then they will come back with a search warrant so they can help him find his ID. He came back in a minute with his ID. They then quickly looked up his record and they confirmed to us that he was mentally ill. What it wasn't told to us, and that he had been stalking another person once before, maybe his girlfriend that actually wanted our apartment, and that they can't make him move due to his governmental protection. but that they will talk to his mental health institute about this incident, and at the end of the talk they really recommended my mum to move, as they know law enforcement can be slow in those cases, and they didn't want to risk my mum or my's well-being. My dad was now coming around more often due to this for 2 months until we moved. We left the place for my cousin, who moved in next. When my cousin moved in, he met the neighbour, who then asked him, "Where's Mary?" And my cousin told him that he will never see her again, and that he better not talk to him or his family ever again. I think that scared him off, because shortly after that he mysteriously moved from one day to another, and that was the end of the story. So, creepy neighbour guy who has ruined Britney Spears for me forever, let's never meet again. Home invaders taken by surprise. This story happened when I was 12 years old. I'm a female and 25 now. The story I'm about to tell you might not be scary to most, but for me and my parents it was. I remember it was Saturday night around 9 or 10 p.m. during summertime. I owned one dog at the time, his name was Benny. My parents decided that night that they felt like going for a walk around the block, walking Benny, and asked me whether I wanted to join them. I said no, because I wanted to play PWI on my PC, Perfect World International. My parents were okay with leaving me alone since the walk wouldn't take any longer than 30 minutes tops. As my parents would get dressed to leave the house, I logged into PWI and looked around in my guild and global chat to see if anyone was on. For some reason no one was, so I decided to join my parents. I get dressed, I put Benny on his leash, and we all leave. I'd like to mention that I lived in an apartment building that had 10 floors, and we lived on the very first floor. Not sure how to explain, but you have the basement of the building and then the first row of apartments. Basically you enter the building and already are facing apartments. I lived in the very first one. I remember always hating that, because whoever would pass by our door, we would hear them at any time of the day or night. Whoever was lurking at night, we would hear them. It was somewhat eerie to live on floor 0. Anyway, we leave the house, my dad closes the door, we had 3 keyholes and a steel bar that would block the door from the inside. The bar covered half of the door. Precautions were my father's obsession. We exit the building and enjoy our walk. After 15 minutes we realise the wind has changed from warm summer wind to incoming storm wind. My mum makes the call to go back home, as Benny already did his duties, so we all return. We open the building door, climb the 5 stairs to our door and attempt to open it, and my father does the following: unlocks the first 3 locks and then attempts to unlock the metal bar that holds the door locked. At that moment my father pauses, turns around at us with the most serious face I've ever seen on him, and whispers to call the police and ring the neighbour's doorbell. My mum goes to the second apartment, and the neighbour, who I will call Ted, comes out asking my father what happened. My dad whispered to him, covering the see-through hole of the door, "Someone is in our home. He or they are holding the door. Please stay here with my family and attempt to open it. I'll be back." After saying that, I see my father rush all by himself around the building in the dark. I say dark because we didn't have street lights on at the side of our apartment facing the block garden. My dad disappears into the darkness. I go outside too, not following him too much, but only to hear if he's in trouble. He's my dad, and don't judge me. As soon as I get out, I hear him shout, "Hey, you, come back. Who the hell do you think you are? I called the police." At the same time I hear him shout, I look at Ted, who managed to open the door and enter the house. I go after them and enter my house. It no longer felt like my house. In just 15 minutes while we were walking, the home invaders made a complete mess of our house. All our shelves and wardrobes were pulled out. Our clothes scattered all over the house. Benny's dry food was all over the floor, indicating they must have tripped in his bowls, probably not knowing we owned a dog. But what scared me the most was how organised they were. I say they because after seeing the disaster that was left behind, we knew it was impossible for just one person to hold the door, steal and organise what they would want to take with them. I say organised because the thieves put in our living room all packed and ready what they wanted, but couldn't steal. On the couch they'd placed our laptops, one of our TVs, my father's collection of coins, our phones, chargers, wallets, and even my father's camera. He's a photographer, and that week he had to attend a wedding. They didn't have enough time to steal all of that, so they just settled with some of my mum's jewellery and some pocket money. After seeing this, in my silly child mind, I rushed to my room to check my piggy bank. I always saved up my money from whatever chores I did. It wasn't much, but it was my work and savings, and at the time I thought they stole it too. When I entered my room, I see the metal bars covering my windows are cut open and my window broken. This is how they entered. Through my room. My room is the only one facing the side of the building and the one most secluded from view. Needless to say, I never felt safe in my own room, in which I had to live for the next 10 years of my life until I moved in with my fiancée. The police arrived. They start throwing white dust, I have no idea what it's called, all over our house to find fingerprints. They take pictures, take our statements, analyse my room and window. They were unable to catch the home invaders, but were able to tell us that this invasion was not the only one in our neighbourhood. During that month, another 4 houses were broken into, one of them being the home of a cop, not related to the cops at our home. They told us that the invaders analysed their victims, learned their schedule, even knew where the children's rooms were, as they seemed to be entering the house through children's windows. All the families affected by them had children. They did not expect us to be back that soon and panicked, hence one of them was holding the door with his body so that the others could flee. The person after which my dad was shouting was probably the one holding the door and escaping last through my broken window. I don't know what could have happened if I didn't change my mind and give up on raiding for gear in PWI. I would probably have come face to face with these invaders. I am happy I didn't and hope to God I never ever meet them. Period. An interaction with a paedophile. My name is Morgan, and at the time of this story, I was 14. I'm a girl who enjoys the nerdier side of life. This was my first experience playing Dungeons and Dragons with a few of my friends at a place called the Sci-Fi Factory. This is a public place, and to be honest, the place is worse for wear. There's holes in the plastic tables, gunk on the floor, shitty outlets, and even shittier people. The people here range from decent to flat out creepy. This is something I learned the hard way. As I was setting up my Elf Rogue character, a man came over to my group. Let's call him Robbie. He told us he was 24 and talked to my friends. They seemed to know each other, so I was more than okay with letting him join us. He was white, brown hair, busted glasses that made his eyes look bigger than they are, and nothing out of the ordinary clothes. He introduced himself and his age, and then asked the same of me. I told him I was Morgan and I was 14. Robbie quickly showed his weirder side. Even if it wasn't the conversation piece, he'd complain about how much of a dumb bitch his girlfriend was, and he came here just to avoid her. He didn't break up with the bitch because she was his only source of income and shelter. He hated her, that was clear. He also bragged about the knife he stole from Walmart, and even showed it to us. Hell, he let me hold it, and taught me how to flip it in and out without hurting myself. Remember those glasses? Well, they were busted and broken up from a bar fight. That really unnerved me about this guy. He seemed to be so kind and friendly, but he was casually talking about assaulting other people. Then he did what I never expected him to do. He got my attention and made me lean towards him so I can see his Android phone still plugged into the wall to charge. He had a notes app open and it read, "Hey, I know this sounds creepy, but oh god, this can't end well. I think we should totally date." There was a whole paragraph more written, but I didn't need to see what he thought of me. He expected some sort of response, so I gave him a, "Oh no, I'm not really interested in a relationship." "Oh, that's cool. That's cool. Still friends?" "Yeah." What was I supposed to say? No to the guy that's been in a bar fight and has a knife on him? Neither of my 2 friends heard our conversation, so I was stuck next to Robbie for the next hour until our session was over. During that time, I offered Robbie some gummy worms. They weren't my favourite thing in the world, but the Dollar Tree nearby has good prices. He laughed and said to me, "Food is the way to a man's heart. Are you trying to seduce me right now?" No. You can say it's a joke and doesn't have any deeper meaning than that, but coming from the man 10 years older than me who had just asked me out, I wasn't really laughing at it. When I left the store after the session had ended, I told my friends what had happened. They believed me and told me he was kind of a weird guy. I've been back at the store and run into him once again. He was with a group of friends and a girl I recognised. He kept on asking me to come over and I insisted no. My friends who I was with already knew the story and I was admittedly nervous. Even as we were leaving, he tried to get me to come over, but after that I never saw him again. I later learned that it's because he was arrested for assault and vandalising school property. Funny thing is, he doesn't go to any school. Do you have a second mouth? Hi, I'm bored in lockdown and thought I'll share another one of my creepy encounters in my life. When I was about 8 or 9 years old, I went to a public swimming pool with my parents, their friend, and their daughter. For context, the public pool was a very large area and there were many pools for children and adults equally. There were also stairs built on a hill that would lead to another field where there was sand, a playground, another sports pool and various shops around. You could also lay down on the hill. There were no restrictions to where to put your towel. It's a very popular pool in my city for families and it's fencing on a park. The gates to the park being right next to the parking lot for the public pool. There was also my elementary school just at the end of the street, so many kids would go there in the summer. So back to the story. We were having a nice day at the pool. Me and the friend's daughter, let's call her Nikki, would do our own thing though, like most kids at the pool. The parents would mostly stay at the towel and we would go to the pools, but always had to tell our parents where we were going. At first we were sitting right at the pool area, upstairs. Later we would move our spot from the pool area to close to where the stairs to the downstairs area were, directly on the hill. Nikki and I got bored of the pools, so we wanted to go to the downstairs playground. We told our parents, and since they were directly on the hill and able to see us from where they were, they said it was cool. Nikki and I looked like kids. It was the early 2000s and there was no social media influence on kids yet, so kids dressed like kids. Neither of us also had any womanly curves yet. I wore a two-piece child swimsuit. As far as I remember, Nikki was only wearing swim shorts, but since she was a child, she didn't have anything she had to cover yet. The early 2000s were very loose when it comes to covering children up in public pools. Many children were running around naked. As we were playing at the playground, which was close to the fence to the park, I heard a voice say, "Hello? Hello?" At first, I wasn't sure if the voice was directed at us, and also, I couldn't see anybody. I remember saying to Nikki, "Did you hear that?" But she hadn't heard it, so I thought it was just somebody on the phone in the park. Then again, "Hello, hello, hello, little girls." This time we both heard it and started to look around. We noticed a figure standing at the other side of the fence surrounded by bushes. No wonder we couldn't see him. His face was almost totally covered by leaves of the bushes, and we could only see parts of his shirt and trousers. He caught our attention. "Have you seen my jumping ball?" Yeah, he said jumping ball. Even back then, I thought, that's weird. "What?" one of us asked. I can't remember who. "My jumping ball. I was playing with it and it fell over the fence. I think it fell somewhere in the bushes. Can you look for it?" My friend Nikki was eager to help him and went into the bushes to look around. "I don't see anything," I remember her saying. "Do you have a second mouth?" that guy suddenly asked. "A second mouth? What do you mean, a second mouth?" I asked. He just repeated the same question. I suddenly felt very panicked. I thought all of this was very weird. I couldn't see the guy, but I noticed his hand kept moving very rapidly. I suddenly had a weird gut feeling and told Nikki that maybe we should go back to our parents. I didn't tell her calmly, as I suddenly felt very panicked. I said very rapidly, let's go back, Nikki," and was already moving away, leaving her no choice but to follow me. We went back to our parents and told them what had just happened. They jumped up and told us to show them where we met this guy. We led them downstairs to where he was, but he was gone. Our parents believed us anyways and told us to never interact with strangers again, to go straight to them and tell them straight away. I remember my dad even saying, "If somebody asks you if you have a second mouth, I am your second mouth." and you're going to get me immediately. I noticed how serious it was, and I knew from the beginning there was something up with this guy, but our parents have made us understand how serious it was with their reaction. Now, I know of course that he meant my downstairs area with second mouth, and his rapid hand motion was due to him jerking off. Looking back, I'm very glad I listened to my gut feeling. Strange man following my daughter through a store. This happened a few years ago when my little one was around 9 years old. My daughter and I were on our way home from a night out with family when we decided to stop at the dollar store for some treats and to use the restroom. We were wandering the store when I started to feel like something was wrong. I noticed a man that seemed to be following us through each aisle and watching my daughter. I typically go through each aisle in order. I have a tiny bit of OCD. But I felt something in the pit of my stomach, so I went through a few aisles in a random pattern, and he was there in each aisle watching us and getting close to my little girl. I didn't let my daughter know that anything was wrong. I didn't want to scare her in case I was just being a paranoid mom. So I put her arm through mine and told her we ought to go. The man ended up in line at the register next to us and was basically following us right out the door. My fight or flight was in high gear. The hair at the base of my neck was standing on end and my gut was screaming at me to get in the car as fast as possible. I quietly told her to just climb in on my side, something she loves to do. I used my key to unlock the driver's side door and locked and started the car immediately. I pulled out of the parking lot to leave and the guy that had followed us in the store pulled out directly behind us. Now we live up in the mountains, so to get home from town is quite a drive through a long winding canyon and around a lake. There wasn't a lot of traffic heading in that direction, and I was still feeling anxious and uncomfortable knowing he was behind us, so I sped up. It just didn't feel right. He was uncomfortably close behind us, blinding me with his headlights. Halfway through the canyon, I quickly pulled off the side of the road. I didn't signal when I pulled over, and I immediately pulled out behind his car as I wanted his license plate, just in case he immediately sped up to the point that I wouldn't feel safe pursuing. He was going over 70 on this tiny winding road. As I came to the last bend headed up towards the lake, I still felt like something was wrong, so I turned my lights out, no cars around and plenty of light by the moon, and drove up to where you can turn left to go around the lake or go straight and go around the lake on the right. As I turned left, I could see a car, you could barely see dash lights, pulled over on the right side just past the spillway, so I continued with my lights off, didn't signal and turned to go around the lake. After we crossed and started round the bend where my taillight could be seen from the other side, I watched the other car flip around and head across the spillway. It was the same car that had followed us all the way up. I took multiple back roads home that night and that car followed us for most of the way. I switched back and forth on multiple roads. I wasn't going anywhere near home while they were behind me, just in case. What should have been a 20-minute drive became an hour. Who knows? Maybe they weren't following me. Maybe they were. I sure felt unsafe, and I always trust my gut. Well, thank you very much. I hope you've enjoyed this video. If you have, please give it a like and hit the subscribe button and tickle the bell so that you get notifications of when we next post videos. Until then, stay scared.